"If that's the case," he said, gesturing with his piece of chicken, "Fela talks about you all the time, thinks you're a hell of a guy, plus the whole saving her life thing. I'm pretty sure you have a chance there." I shrugged, watching the patterns the wind made in the fountain's spray. "You know what we should—" Sim stopped mid-thought, staring past me, his expression going suddenly blank. I turned to see what he was looking at, and saw my lute case. Empty. My lute was gone. I looked around wildly, ready to spring to my feet and dash off searching for it. But there was no need. A few feet away stood Ambrose and a few of his friends. He held my lute loosely in one hand. "Oh, merciful Taily," Simon muttered behind me. Then at a normal volume he said, "Give it back, Ambrose." "Quiet, Elia," Ambrose snapped. "This is none of your concern." I got to my feet, keeping my eyes on him, on my lute. I'd come to think of Ambrose as taller than me, but when I stood I saw that we were eye level with each other. Ambrose seemed a bit surprised as well. "Give it to me," I said and stretched out my hand. I was surprised to see that it wasn't shaking. I was shaking inside, half fear, half fury. Two parts of me tried to speak at the same time. The first part cried, "Please don't do anything to it, not again, don't break it, please give it back, don't hold it by the neck like that." The other half of me was chanting, "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you," like spitting out mouthfuls of blood. I took a step forward. "Give it to me." My voice sounded odd to my own ears, emotionless and flat as my outstretched palm. I'd stopped shaking inside. He paused for a moment, caught unaware by something in my tone. I could sense his unease. I wasn't acting the way he had expected. Behind me, I could hear Willem and Simon hold their breath. Behind Ambrose, his friends paused, suddenly unsure. Ambrose smiled and cocked an eyebrow. "But I've written a song for you and it needs to be accompanied." He gripped the lute roughly and dragged his fingers across the strings with no thought for rhythm or tune. People stopped to watch as he sang. "There once was a rabble named Kvothe, whose tongue was quick at quipping. The masters thought him clever and rewarded him with a whipping." Quite a few passers-by had stopped to watch by this point, smiling and laughing at Ambrose's little show. Encouraged, Ambrose made a sweeping bow. "Everyone sing!" he shouted, raising his hands like an orchestra conductor, gesturing with my lute like a baton. I took another step forward. "Give it back, or I will kill you." At that moment, I meant it in perfect earnest. Everything grew quiet again. Seeing he wasn't going to get the rise he had expected from me, Ambrose affected nonchalance. "Some people have no sense of humor," he said with a sigh. "Catch!" He tossed it to me. But lutes are not meant to be tossed. It twisted awkwardly in the air, and when I grabbed, there was nothing in my hands. Whether he was clumsy or cruel makes not the slightest difference to me. My lute hit the cobblestones, bowl first, and made a splintering noise. The sound reminded me of the terrible noise my father's lute had made, crushed beneath my body in a soot-streaked alley in Tarbeen. I bent to pick it up, and it made a noise like a wounded animal. Ambrose half turned to look back at me, and I saw flickers of amusement play across his face. I opened my mouth to howl, to cry, to curse him, but something other tore from my throat, a word I did not know and could not remember. Then all I could hear was the sound of the wind. It roared into the courtyard like a sudden storm. A nearby carriage slid sideways across the cobblestones, its horses rearing up in panic. Sheet music was torn from someone's hands to streak around us like strange lightning. I was pushed forward a step. Everyone was pushed by the wind, everyone but Ambrose, who pinwheeled to the ground as if struck by the hand of God. Then everything was still again. Papers fell, twisting like autumn leaves. People looked around, dazed, their hair tousled and clothes in disarray. Several people staggered as they braced against a storm that was no longer there. My throat hurt. My lute was broken. Ambrose staggered to his feet. He held his arm awkwardly at his side, and blood was running down from his scalp. The look of wild, confused fear he gave me was a brief, sweet pleasure. I considered shouting at him again, wondering what would happen. Would the wind come again? Would the ground swallow him up? I heard a horse whinnying in panic. People began to pour from the Aeolian and the other buildings around the courtyard. Musicians looked around wildly, and everyone was talking at once. What's that? Notes are all over. Help me before they get... Did it? Him over there, with the red demon, a demon of the wind, and... I looked around in mute confusion, until Willem and Simon hurried me away. We didn't know where to take him, Simon said to Kilvin.
Say it all to me again,
Kilvin said calmly.
But this time only one talks.
He pointed at Willem.
Try to put the words all in a tidy row.
We were in Kilvin's office. The door was closed and the curtains drawn. Willem began to explain what had happened. As he gained speed, he switched to Siaru. Kilvin kept nodding along, his face thoughtful. Simon listened intently, occasionally interjecting a word or two. I sat on a stool nearby. My mind was a whirl of confusion and half-formed questions. My throat was sore. My body was weary and full of sour adrenaline. In the middle of it all, deep in the center of my chest, a piece of me burned in anger like a forge coal fanned red and hot. All around me there was a great numbness, as if I was sealed in wax 10 inches thick. There was no Kvothe, only the confusion, the anger, and the numbness wrapping him. I was like a sparrow in a storm, unable to find a safe branch to cling to, unable to control the tumbling motion of my flight. Willem was reaching the end of his explanation when Elodine entered the room without knocking or announcing himself. Willem fell silent. I spared the master namer half a glance, then looked back toward the shattered lute in my hand. As I turned it over in my hands, one of its sharp edges cut my finger. I blankly watched the blood well up and fall to the floor. Elodine came to stand directly in front of me, not bothering to speak to anyone else.
Kvothe? He's not right, master,
Simon said, his voice shrill with worry.
He's gone all dumb. He won't say a thing.
While I heard the words, knew they had meaning, even knew the meanings that belonged to them, I couldn't pull any sense from them.
I think he struck his head, Willem said. He looks at you, but nothing is there. His eyes are like a dog's eyes.
Kvothe, Elodine repeated. When I didn't respond or look up from my lute, he reached forward and gently tipped my chin up until I met his eye.
Kvothe.
I blinked. He looked at me. His dark eyes steadied me somewhat, slowed the storm inside me.
Airlefsedi,
he said.
Say it.
What?
Simon said somewhere in the distant background.
Wind?
Airlefsedi,
Elodine repeated patiently, his dark eyes intent upon my face.
Airlefsedi,
I said numbly. Elodine closed his eyes briefly, peacefully, as if he were trying to catch a faint strain of music wafting gently on a breeze. Unable to see his eyes, I began to drift. I looked back down toward the broken lute in my hands, but before my gaze wandered too far, he caught my chin again, tilting my face up. His eyes caught mine. The numbness faded, but the storm still turned inside my head. Then Elodine's eyes changed. He stopped looking toward me and looked into me. That is the only way I can describe it. He looked deep into me, not into my eyes, but through my eyes. His gaze went into me and settled solidly in my chest, as if he had both his hands inside me, feeling the shape of my lungs, the movement of my heart, the heat of my anger, the pattern of the storm that thundered inside me. He leaned forward, and his lips brushed my ear. I felt his breath. He spoke, and the storm stilled. I found a place to land. There is a game all children try at some time or another. You fling out your arms and spin round and round, watching as the world blurs. First you are disoriented, but if you continue to spin long enough, the world resolves itself, and you are no longer dizzy as you spin with the world blurring around you. Then you stop, and the world lurches into regular shape. The dizziness strikes you like a thunderclap. Everything lurches, moves, the world tilts around you. That is what happened when Elodine stilled the storm in my head. Suddenly, violently dizzy, I cried out and raised my hands to keep myself from falling sideways, falling upward, falling inward. I felt arms catch me as my feet tangled in the stool, and I began to topple to the floor. It was terrifying, but it faded. By the time I recovered, Elodine was gone.